Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host Chris, and today we're talking about Brazilian artist Bilquis Evely. Now, Bilquis Evely is one of my favorite modern artists. She has a distinct visual style that feels at home in mainstream comics, but could also fit comfortably with classic illustration or European bande dessinée. Her art resists easy categorization. I'd call her line work delicate, but that doesn't make the characters or environment feel fragile. It's intricately detailed, but not at all cluttered. She's in complete control. Her last few comics, Helen of Wyndhorn, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, they are simultaneously epic and intimate. This balancing act fascinates me. So today, we're going to look at how Bilquis broke into mainstream US comics and what she brings to the table to make her work stand out. Before we begin, please consider hitting like and subscribe. Maybe leave a comment afterwards if you've got something to add. That helps the algorithm. That's my whole spiel. Let's get into talking about Ms. Evely's history. Bilquis Evely was born in 1990 in Barueri, a city in the greater Sao Paulo region of Brazil. She broke into comics at a young age, drawing the 2009 title Luluzinha Teen e Sua Turma, which was a manga-influenced take on the American comic Little Lulu.
Why don't you chill out?
Very well. Oh, little Lulu, I love you, Lou, just the same.
She broke into American comics just a few years later in 2012 at Dynamite Entertainment, drawing titles like Doc Savage and Shaft. By 2015, she was invited to work at DC on DC Comics Bombshells, drawing Supergirl. Within a decade, she'd become famously associated with that character. Evely has an art style that's recognizable, but wouldn't fit in with what was called a house style employed by Marvel and DC throughout the Bronze Age. That was a time when there were superstar artists. Certainly there was Neil Adams or John Buscema, but the editors were ruthless about making sure that characters were on model and would even have artists as famous as Jack Kirby get artwork redrawn to fit in. We've moved past that era, in my opinion, and it's more important that an artist will have storytelling fundamentals, but can then wrap other influences into their work and stand out. But one thing that's interesting about Evely's work is that she's influenced by the previous generation of artists. In a 2024 interview with Zona Negativa, she listed her influences, quote, classic artists like Alex Raymond of Flash Gordon or Walt Simonson, artists who worked with pencil with a more fluid, direct line. I prefer classic artists to modern ones, end quote. I can see some of the fine lines of a master like Alex Raymond mirrored in Evely's work. Simonson is an interesting mention because he uses pretty bold, simplified contour lines, but when you look at Evely's splash pages, I think you can see some of the dynamic influences of Simonson, maybe some of the big, bold shapes. In an interview with Comic US from 2025's Lucca convention in Italy, Evely also mentioned French artist Mobius, who similarly uses thin, uniform lines, and also classic painters like Monet and Van Gogh. Evely's artwork in The Dreaming, which was a continuation of the world of Sandman, employed fine illustrative line work with visible hatching and delicate texture strokes. Her double-page spreads in The Dreaming were called out by Entertainment Weekly in 2018, where they said she was the best artist of the year. That detailed but gentle line work works exceptionally well in fantasy stories like The Dreaming and later Helen of Wyndhorn. But it's a bit of a surprise to see how well it works on mainstream superheroes like Supergirl. 2021's miniseries, Woman of Tomorrow, alongside writer Tom King and colorist Mateus Lopez, is, at its heart, a road trip story and a western, a tale of hunting down outlaws. But it also takes time to set up fantastical environments that really test Supergirl, like a planet without a yellow sun, which saps her powers and causes her agony. Her artwork in this story doesn't lean into the superhero tropes of exaggerated musculature. Instead, it relies on Evely making her characters feel naturalistic and expressive. The setting for Supergirl is also very important to the story, and Evely's backgrounds are not merely functional, but lush, immersive environments filled with decorative detail. They also tend to guide the eye to the subject, either with the composition or an intentional negative space. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow was a critical and commercial success. It received an Eisner nomination for Best Limited Series, and it's been adapted into a live-action film this summer. It helps show that readers and publishers are ready to embrace an approach to superhero comics that all call painterly. A crucial component of Evely's artistic voice is her long-running collaboration with colorist Matheus Lopes. The Brazilian artists collaborated on Supergirl and then reached a new level of recognition with Helen of Wyndhorn, also written by Tom King. In Helen of Wyndhorn, Lopes adopts a deliberately limited palette. He often focuses on yellow, blue, and purple. This allows Evely's line work to breathe while creating a sense of emotional distance, a key theme in the comic. This approach aligns closely, in my opinion, with the 60-30-10 color theory, which filmmakers from Quentin Tarantino to Wes Anderson will utilize. That's where 60% of an image uses a dominant color to establish mood and tone, 30% acts as a contrast, with the remaining 10% acting as an accent to create focal points. A clear example appears in issue 5, where Supergirl has to survive on a planet without a yellow sun. Green dominates the environment, muted browns or grays around the composition, and small bursts of red or yellow draw the eye to key actions or characters. Comics colorists with access to digital coloring and modern painting techniques can over-render things, but Lopes keeps the focus on the character and the mood that Evely lays out. It's a fantastic partnership. In the Zona Negativa interview, Evely and Lopes discuss how they find it easy to communicate, and Evely explained, quote, "We worked together for 2 years before we were a couple. We already had a working dynamic that worked." Lopes added, "We were friends before, and we fell in love." Supergirl was certainly Evely's big breakthrough in Western comics, a huge success. I think one element that readers responded to, sometimes unconsciously, was Evely's composition and page design, which balance classic storytelling with some experimental pacing. This isn't one of Tom King's books that has tons of 9-panel grids. There's a good amount of wide, cinematic panels to establish the wild environments. There are tight close-ups of Supergirl and the girl that she's helping, Ruth, that captures emotional nuance. And there are panels that seem to focus on what I'll call temporal stillness, scenes that linger longer than expected, allowing readers to absorb the emotional impact of the scene. To slow down a reader by using composition, gesture, and texture is truly expert-level pacing. Evely's figures are expressive without exaggeration. Supergirl is depicted not as a hyper-detailed superhero, but as a weary traveler, a real person who has a slouch to her posture and subdued expressions. She's old beyond her years because of the tragedy of losing her people of Krypton at a young age. Ruthie, as the narrator, is animated with subtle shifts in expression that reflect her evolving moral perspective. She begins by wanting revenge and being awed by Supergirl, and slowly learns throughout the course of the story a new way to find compassion. Arguably, Evely's greatest strength is environmental storytelling. Each planet in Supergirl feels distinct, visually, culturally. The series has been described as a cosmic western, and Evely leans into this by blending sci-fi elements with frontier imagery, dusty towns, alien fauna, and vast, empty horizons. With Helen of Wyndhorn, one of my favorite comics from last year, and the comic that I gave my absolute number 1 pick for favorite comic of 2024, Evely pushed her style even further away from superhero conventions into something closer to literary illustration and fantasy art. It still has plenty of big action and adventure pieces, but also amazed me with the attention to details like the 1930s clothing, architecture, vehicles. It earned Evely the Eisner Award for Best Penciler Inker. Helen of Wyndhorn follows the daughter of a novelist who wrote stories about a barbarian warrior like Conan. And, mirroring the real-life author of Conan, Robert E. Howard, the writer takes his own life. After her father's death, Helen goes to live with her emotionally distant grandfather and his servants, only to learn that he was the basis for her father's stories. He literally travels to a fantasy world and has epic adventures. One thing I appreciate while reading this story was the characterization. Lots of comic book artists have the challenge of making characters look different while they work on a tight schedule with their signature style. I'd argue that while Bilquis Evely has a recognizable style of her own, her characters look different from one another. Helen and her governess clearly have a different age, a different body type. It's not just a different hairstyle. For a story about how subtle something like depression is, that nuance on character work is really important. Bilquis Evely spoke about that challenge at the Lucca convention to Italian site Screenworld, saying, quote, "I take great pride in conveying the emotional complexity of faces. I like to pay attention to the eyes. When Helen is sad, she can also be cold. When she's happy, she can be melancholic. I love portraying these nuances. I'm not interested in pure drama, but in subtlety, the deep shadows, the intense gazes, the ambiguous expressions." The environment itself is also really important to this story, just like it was in Supergirl. Both Helen's new home at her grandfather's manor and the path through a deep swamp to a portal to another world, as well as that fantasy land, are all really important locations. The lush vegetation reminds me of the intricate detail of Filipino master artist Alex Nino, or maybe some people who've worked on Swamp Thing over the years, like Steve Bissett or Bernie Wrightson. There's nothing phoned in about the landscape. It feels organic and real. In some ways, it's really easy to talk about art that I like this much. I can marvel at the design of this serpent, for instance. I find it disturbing and plausible, even though it's made up. I love how the composition guides the eye in a circle around the splash page. And again, I'll shout out how much Lopez's colors complement the artwork in this title. A scene in the shaded swamp is bathed in muted, neutral greens. Scenes inside the lonely manor at dusk have a warm glow to indicate candlelight. The pages have their own tone and don't muddy up the artwork by also having too many hues or values. There's also a patience to Evely's artwork. Look at the amount of detail on the first cover, or the amount of detail in the first splash page. Very different styles, really. How about the first panel to introduce Helen to us? That's a key moment, and there's a lot of detail here. Evely has patience with her process. She will do sketching and lay out perspective grids, then use a light box to get a cleaner penciled page. Then she will carefully ink that page with what must be brushes, I'm not sure which ones, but the lines have a flowing quality. They're varying line weights. They get bigger and smaller. There's something to that variety of line weights that give the pages an organic instead of a mechanical or clinical feel. She spoke about her art style to Screenworld, saying, quote, "In Helen of Wyndhorn, there were moments where I had to use a lot of black, and others where the scenes needed to be brighter and more airy. The whole work revolved around balance, the weight of the line, finding the balance between shadow and light, between anxiety and poetry." There's a framing device in Helen of Wyndhorn set in the modern day telling Helen's story. These pages often have borderless panels and restrained layouts. Meanwhile, the main story has dense, overlapping compositions. In some ways, I really do believe that this duality of storytelling mirrors the duality of the story itself. It blurs the lines between fiction and reality, but it makes the point of saying that the emotions felt by the characters are always real. From Supergirl to Helen of Wyndhorn, Bilquis Evely represents a current shift in what mainstream comics can look like. She utilizes classic illustration techniques but builds upon them. Stylized rendering, but rock-solid composition and storytelling decisions. Her success with those last two books, critically, commercially, and artistically, suggests that comics will always continue to evolve. There can be popular movements, but individuals will guide the medium forward with a new way of presenting a story. If it's not clear, I strongly recommend both Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow and Helen of Wyndhorn. Helen of Wyndhorn, like I say, favorite book of 2024, just an incredible story. Hope you'll give it a shot if you haven't read it, and if you have read her work, maybe this can give you another appreciation on a new level. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to have a different type of an episode next week. Yeah, that's enough. I won't spoil it. Let me give you a few behind-the-scenes thoughts over the closing credits, just let you know what's been going on with my flooded house and stuff. But until I see you for the next proper episode, keep reading comics. Folks, progress on repairing my badly damaged house has been slow, but it is moving forward, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank a lot of you. I did a GoFundMe because there was just no way my wife and I were going to be able to pay for this without help, and you all stepped up in a way that really, we just both want to thank you. It's very hard to put into words, but some very generous donations from friends and family, but also you guys, the viewers, and it means a lot to us. We were in a bad situation. Insurance was not going to help us much, and you kept us from going into like just financial ruin. So that means a lot. But as long as I'm thanking people, there were a few other people that stepped up outside of the campaign. I wanted to thank Peach Momoko and her husband and partner, Yo Mutsu. You guys helped me in a very generous way. I want to thank Comic Tom 101 and Ryan and his crew. That was amazing to do the Whatnot sale. That really helped us as well. The folks at Dynamite Comics, Nick Barucci, Jeff Mazza, you guys helped. Andy Kuhn, the artist, donated an original piece of artwork that I was able to auction off on the Comic Tom Whatnot stream. My friend Dave from West Coast Avengers, great channel, he donated an original piece of art that he owned that I was able to auction off, and these are just some examples of people that really stepped up in a way. I'm not comfortable asking for help. I didn't want to have to do it. I felt like I didn't have a choice, and people didn't make us feel bad about it. Instead, they really stepped up and helped us in a big way. And we're taking it very seriously. So it's going slow, the repairs and everything, and the billing, but we're going to get through it. We know we're going to get through it, thanks to all of you. So thanks for letting me take a minute to say thank you. See you soon. The environment itself is also really important to this story, just like in Supergirl. The environment itself is also